The Lime Rain exploit, released in 2010, was a major breakthrough in iPhone jailbreaking because it targeted the device at a hardware level. Instead of relying on software bugs that could be patched easily, it exploited a USB overflow flaw in the boot room of Apple's A4 chip, which is the first code that runs when the device starts up. By sending specially crafted data to the device while it was in DFU mode and connected to a computer, the exploit was able to bypass Apple's secure boot chain and gain low-level access to the system. Because bootrom is read-only and built into the hardware, Apple could not fix this vulnerability with just a software update, making it permanently effective on affected devices like the iPhone 4. This made Lime Rain extremely valuable for the jailbreaking community, and Apple later addressed it by actually redesigning the hardware in newer phones. But Lime Rain remains a legendary exploit because it gave those older iPhone generations endless customization through said jailbreaking. The JailbreakMe exploit, first released in 2010 and later updated in newer versions, was one of the most famous and user-friendly iPhone exploits ever created because it allowed devices to be jailbroken directly through a website. So instead of needing a computer, users would simply visit a specially crafted webpage in Safari, which triggered a vulnerability in how iOS handled PDF files. The exploit worked by loading a malicious PDF that took advantage of a stack-based buffer overflow in the free type font rendering library, allowing code to run as soon as the file was processed. This gave the exploit enough access to escape the Safari sandbox and gain control over the device, effectively bypassing Apple's security in seconds. Its simplicity made jailbreaking widely accessible for everyday users. Apple quickly responded by patching the vulnerability in iOS updates and also tightening how font-heavy files like PDFs are actually handled. The Trident exploit, discovered in 2016, was a chain of 3 zero-day vulnerabilities that allowed attackers to fully take control of an iPhone. It typically started with a malicious link sent through a text message, and when tapped, it opened a specially crafted webpage that exploited a memory corruption flaw in Safari's WebKit engine, giving the attacker initial access. From there, a second vulnerability allowed the attacker to perform a kernel information leak to bypass memory protections, while a third flaw used kernel memory corruption to grant full administrative control, effectively jailbreaking the device without the user even noticing. This level of access allowed the installation of Pegasus spyware developed by NSO Group, which could read messages, track location, record calls, and activate the microphone or camera. The exploit was used in targeted surveillance, and Apple quickly responded by releasing iOS 9.3.5 to patch all 3 vulnerabilities. This, however, would not be the end of Pegasus. The Checkmate exploit, found in 2019, is a hardware-based vulnerability that affects a wide range of older iPhones, from the iPhone 4S up to the iPhone X. Unlike most exploits, it also targets the device's boot ROM, which is again the very first code that runs when an iPhone powers on. Because this code is masked into the chip itself, it cannot be patched with a software update, right? The exploit works by triggering a USB heap overflow flaw while the device is in DFU mode and is connected to a computer, allowing attackers to bypass Apple's secure boot chain and gain low-level control. So very similar to Lime Rain, however it requires physical access and cannot be triggered remotely. While powerful, it was mainly used by researchers and jailbreak developers rather than for widespread attacks. Apple mitigated by once again redesigning the hardware in newer devices, making Checkmate a permanent flaw only in older iPhones with A5 through A11 chips. The Kismet exploit, disclosed in 2020, was a zero-click iPhone exploit used by Pegasus spyware that allowed attackers to compromise the device without any user interaction. Working through iMessage, it sends specially crafted data that background processes like iMagent and IM transcoder agent would automatically parse. The exploit targeted how iOS handled certain attachments, triggering a memory corruption vulnerability that allowed code execution without the message ever being opened or visible for the user. From there, it chained additional flaws to escape the messaging sandbox and gain full system access, enabling the installation of Pegasus capable of accessing messages, microphone, camera, and location data. In real-world use, this was actually deployed in targeted surveillance against journalists and activists, which was a major escalation since it, again, no longer required any user input. This led to Apple to introduce the BlastPass service in iOS 14, which is a dedicated sandboxed parser written in Swift to move complex data processing into a memory-safe environment to prevent similar invisible attacks. And then comes the forced entry exploit, uncovered in 2021, which is one of the most advanced iPhone attacks ever discovered, also capable of compromising devices without any user interaction. It was a zero-click exploit delivered through iMessage, where a malicious PDF disguised as a GIF would be processed automatically. This file exploited a math error in an old system used for black and white image compression, allowing attackers to execute code as soon as the message was received. What made forced entry a legendary exploit was how it used that image system to, somehow, build what was called a weird machine, which was a custom hidden computer created entirely inside the phone's memory. This secret computer would then allow the exploit to solve complex puzzles and bypass Apple's toughest security filters completely undetected. And once inside, it installed Pegasus spyware, giving attackers total access to, again, pretty much everything. Apple responded by patching the vulnerability and later introduced lockdown mode to provide an extreme layer of security. While this was patched, this remains one of the deepest iOS exploits to date. The Fugu 14 exploit, released in 2021, was a multi-stage iOS 14 jailbreak chain that showed how several smaller vulnerabilities could be combined to gain full control of modern iPhones. Instead of relying on one major flaw, it used a series of bugs to move step by step through Apple's security layers, starting from a side-loaded app and gradually increasing its level of access. From there, additional vulnerabilities were used to bypass the phone's built-in memory protections, eventually reaching full system control. This allowed the jailbreak to remain active even after a reboot, a feat that is normally very difficult to achieve on newer devices. Fugu 14 was mainly a research-driven jailbreak rather than a real-world attack, and Apple patched the underlying issues in later iOS 14 updates. The Operation Triangulation exploit, publicly revealed in 2023, was a highly advanced iPhone attack that used a chain of multiple zero-day vulnerabilities to silently infect devices through iMessage. It began with an invisible message that the user never saw, containing a specially crafted attachment that was automatically processed in the background, triggering code execution without any interaction. From there, the attack loaded additional stages from external servers, using several more flaws to bypass iOS security protections and gradually gain deeper access, eventually reaching full control of the device at a system level. What made it especially notable was its complexity, including the use of undocumented hardware features and Apple chips to bypass built-in protections. And unlike Fugu 14, the spyware installed was indeed dangerous and could extract messages, record audio, track location, and access very sensitive data. The campaign used a certain exploit called Photon and targeted specific individuals over several years. Apple did respond by releasing multiple security updates in 2023 to patch the vulnerability and block this exploit chain. The BlastPass exploit, also disclosed in 2023, was a zero-click iPhone attack that targeted Apple's passkit system, which handles things like Apple Pay and digital passes. It was delivered through iMessage using a specially crafted message that required, again, no interaction from the user, allowing the attack to run automatically in the background. The exploit worked by taking advantage of a memory error in how the iPhone system processes images within digital passes, letting attackers execute code within a restricted messaging environment. From there, it used additional techniques to escape those restrictions and gain broader access to the system. What made BlastPass particularly notable was that it managed to bypass Apple's Blast Door security feature, which had been specifically designed to prevent exactly these kinds of iMessage attacks. The exploit was used to deploy Pegasus spyware from NSO Group, enabling access to, again, every single bit of sensitive data you can think of. Apple patched the vulnerability in iOS 16.6.1, closing the exploit and strengthening iMessage protections further, while encouraging at-risk users to actually enable lockdown mode. Coruna, which was identified in 2025 and analyzed in 2026, is a massive exploit kit containing 23 vulnerabilities arranged into 5 chains, targeting iOS 13 through 17.2.1. It is the direct successor to Operation Triangulation, reusing specialized code modules like Photon to bypass modern defenses. It is delivered through websites, so simply visiting a page could trigger a browser bug that granted an initial foothold. From there, the chain used additional flaws to break out of the browser and escalate into kernel-level control, the deepest access on the device. While used for targeted espionage in Ukraine, its most widespread use was a modular mix-and-match approach for mass cryptocurrency theft, scanning for seed phrases and bank details. Researchers discovered it relied on multiple coordinated steps and non-public bypasses to defeat Apple's hardware-backed protections. The DarkSword exploit, fully detailed in 2026 by Google researchers, is a sophisticated iPhone attack that uses a chain of 6 vulnerabilities to fully compromise devices running iOS 18.4 through 18.7. It is delivered through quote-unquote watering hole attacks, where hackers compromise legitimate news and government websites to try and infect visitors. The chain begins with a WebKit flaw in Safari that triggers the moment a page loads, requiring no user interaction. From there, it bypasses hardware protections like pointer authentication to escape the browser sandbox and once again gain kernel-level access. DarkSword is very hit-and-run in nature, as it deploys memory-only malware families like Ghostblade and GhostSaber that extract messages, keychain passwords, and crypto wallets within minutes. Once the data is stolen, the malware automatically wipes itself off the system and exits cleanly to leave no forensic trace for researchers to find. This dual-use kit, used by both state-sponsored spies and financial criminals, was active in the wild since late 2025 across multiple regions without anyone knowing. Apple patched these vulnerabilities in early 2026, including the release of iOS 26.3, which means that at the time of me making this video, there are no exploits affecting the latest iOS version, or at least there shouldn't be, so make sure to stay updated just in case. Hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.